Mallory Rubin, as you mentioned, I love witch stuff.
You love a witch. You hate a crevice, but you love a witch.
I love threads and fate and destiny. So we, of course, have to talk for a second about the fact that when we covered Ahsoka, we were noting every single time House Hottie or one of the Night Sisters or Morgan
House Hottie
were mentioning threads and fate. The threads of fate. Fate has decided her next move. What thread is she spinning? It was a loose thread, they say, about something they couldn't see coming. The thread of fate has spoken to us. The thread of destiny demands it. Right? These are classic.
It is a loose thread was a really fun one.
It was a loose thread. It was a really, really fun one. So, like, that's obviously they were like a reference to the fates, and we talked a lot about the mythology around that. But I think it's no coincidence that we're talking about magic and the Force in similar language across these different witchy covens.
Yes, which I love. The tie to the covens, the tie to, because even though, again, these are not the Night Sisters, that is another interesting. We don't have enough information about this coven to really make a call, but the question of like, well, what is darkness?
Right.
Magique! When you're wielding your magique and tapping into some sort of dark power.
Yeah.
Then the way that other Force users or other pockets of society think of you as a threat.
Right. Unnatural.
So that's fascinating. And I mean, it just feels very intentional. Could have been a Force by any other name here, but the fact that we got the thread language is intended to make us think of this.
As Ben pointed out, and I have to agree, when Mother Anastasia says, we know the thread is not a power you wield, but then they go on to talk about power a lot in this episode, and it's just a little like, I think that it has to be intentional. They're not sloppy writers here on this show. So I think it's just like Mother Anastasia, who I really like, and I would absolutely join her coven in a minute.
Yeah, of course.
She's incredible. Is perhaps a bit hypocritical or slightly deceptive in the way that she talks about, when she says later, no weapons, no violence, and then takes over the mind of Torben, I'm like, that's...
Yeah, and again, I like... It's maybe too soon to say whether that's just like not a perfectly executed line or whether that's almost intentional hypocrisy, because that's another interesting parallel. If this group of characters looks at the Jedi and say, what gives you the right, X, Y, and Z, your relationship to the Force, the way you think about who else can use it or tap into it, or even what it is inherently. Like, I thought obviously everything about the thread and destiny, because destiny is the name of the episode. There are a number of other lines about destiny that we'll talk about as we go. Certainly that's the thrust of this, but I thought the claim to use it language was as notable, because the idea that the Force is something you can tap into or channel versus the idea that it's a great tapestry that you are stitched into.
And pull the thread, which I don't feel like I have a full grasp on what is meant by that. It's used again later in another beautiful moment. I don't think we have a clear comp for that. It's not the same as use the Force, Luke. Like, it's not the same thing. So I would love to learn more. If they want to just do a full short spinoff on social media of
webisode
of Mother. Yeah, we're still doing webisodes, right? Of like a Quibi, maybe of Mother Anastasia's sermons. Like, I would go watch them all. But I think that what we want to talk about is this idea of the power of two, the power of many.
Yeah.
Right? We could talk about dyads again if you want to, of course.
It's hard not to.
But this idea of combining power amongst Jedi, and please tell me if I'm wrong about this, like, is not something we've seen a lot of. There's a few examples. There's like season 2, episode 3 of Clone Wars. We've got, and we talked about this, I think, leading up to the Ahsoka podcast. We've got Yoda and Obi-Wan and Mace and Anakin are like meditating to find the Force. Like, they are meditating sort of together. That feels like a combination of Force power. But overall, this idea of like combining power is much more of a Sith concept, at least in the legends, than it is a Jedi concept. Do you agree or disagree about that?
Interesting. Yeah, I think that inside of the Jedi, across the canon, it can be all of the above, but and I think that it could be all of the above one or the other in a given moment and with a given character set for either the Sith or the Jedi. Because, like, you know, we talk about the rule of two a lot, right? With the Sith. A dyad is like two beings who become one force being.
Mm-hmm.
What is the master and apprentice relationship? Now, that's not the same as rule of two, but
yeah, but it's never like Qui-Gon's never like, Obi-Wan, join hands with me and we will use the Force stronger together.
Exactly.
You know?
And this is what I think is interesting about it. It's like the Jedi, it's a wide, vast, especially in this stretch of the canon, collective.
Mm-hmm.
You have temples everywhere. You have these groups of people.
Local temples?
It always goes completely fine for the younglings who are assembled at a given locale.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is the defining relationship in your life is going to be with this one other person. And so I think like all of those things are true at once. It was hard not to think about on the power of many front. We have not seen this yet. We have no idea how this will come into play in the season. And trailers can often be deceptive. But the shot of like all the lightsabers activating at once, that feels like, power of many. You were asking last week when Sol and May were fighting.
Mm-hmm.
You asked a couple things. Why doesn't everybody just kick dirt up into somebody else's face? But also, like, do you think one of your questions was, do you think Yord pulled the blade?
Yeah.
And like, is that something that's kind of priming us for the idea of like, let's work together and tap into some larger force? So I think that's interesting. But I was also struck by, and this might be a inaccurate overreading of the scene. It wouldn't be the first time. But in the stretch where the power of two stretch.
Yeah.
Where Mother Anastasia is first, like it's a little bit of a tutelage for the youngsters, right? And Mother Anastasia is first facing off against one other person and then against two, right? And there seemed to be a little bit of there's a pushing gesture.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was against two, like kind of like a pulling and then a holding, like a harnessing. Like she had actually, it seemed to me like they were implying that there was an ability to actually harness more power.
Yeah.
Right? With more people.
Yes.
Like literally.
Like,
to hold more power in your hands.
Yeah.
And obviously.
Greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
obviously that's happening then later in the Ascension as well, where I'm not an astrologist, nor an astronomer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really. It's a lot of things I'm not.
What? Star stuff?
Star stuff.
Yeah.
But it almost looked like the two moons were like in an eclipse state, right? At that max power.
They were aligning.
Two as one, an alignment, and a pulling, a channeling of that power from two as one that is then ported.
Yes. And the blue and the red of the moon being pulled down into this purple tinged power.
It is a power.
It sure is. And what do you do? What happens when you combine a light saber and a dark saber? You get your blue and your reds. You get Mace Windu.